Welcome back to another AP US History video lecture. Today we're going to be talking about World War I. Now, from an AP US History perspective, there are two big things that we need to talk about. We need to talk first about foreign policy, but then we also need to talk about domestic policy. Now, in the case of foreign policy, what's going to be so important is that World War I is when the United States starts to become a global leader. In domestic policy, we're going to be dealing with something called the imperial presidency. And the imperial presidency has become important long after World War I. It's actually been really important to all of the wars leading all the way up to today with the American presidency. So let's start off with the issue of foreign policy. For America, this issue starts to become important in 1916. And the reason why that's important is that America at that point was isolationist when it came to World War I. When President Wilson ran for the presidency in 1916, he promised he was not going to get involved in this war. It was a European issue, but that was going to change pretty quickly. And there are two big reasons why it changes. First off, Germany developed something called U-boat warfare. U-boat warfare was basically the beginning of submarines. The initial U-boats actually did not dive underneath the ocean. They stayed at the surface, and they would use them to ram up against ships and destroy those ships, and also to create a blockade against trade. The problem, though, that became so important was when they started using U-boat warfare against civilian luxury liners. The best example of this was the Lusitania. The Lusitania was sunk by the Germans, and this created huge anger in America over this issue and pressure on Woodrow Wilson to get involved. A little bit of a problem, though, with that. The Lusitania was not completely a luxury liner. Don't get me wrong, it was. But in the Lusitania, the British had actually been storing munitions to take them from Britain over to the mainland in France, where the war was taking place. Okay, a second big issue why America got involved in as well was something called the Zimmermann Telegram. Zimmermann Telegram was a note that was intercepted by the British, and it was sent by the Germans, the ambassador Zimmermann, to Mexico. And what the note said was that if Mexico got involved in the war and made sure the United States did not get involved in the European war, that once the war was all over, Germany would give Mexico all those lands back that the United States had taken back in the Mexican-American War back in the 1840s. Well, that was a little bit too much, and at that point, the American public agreed that it was time to get involved in this war. Now, there is a bigger context for us to remember, though. Why was Wilson so in favor of getting in on the side of Britain, not on the side of Germany? Well, we mentioned a few reasons, but there's a bigger reason why Wilson didn't get involved on the side of Germany. For a long time, our alliance had been with Britain, both when it came to cultural values and when it came to trade. So actually, Wilson had been looking for some time for us to support Britain in this effort. So once America gets involved in the war in 1917, our presence really throws the war over into victory. Why is that the case? Well, ever since the war had begun, they had been operating under a German plan called the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was the idea of taking the German troops through neutral Belgium, attack down into France, take France out of the war, and then Germany could focus on Russia. Small problem occurred in all of that. When the German army got into northern France, both sides started to develop trench warfare. They basically built 300 square miles of trenches in the hopes that they could wear out the other side. Instead, all they did was stalemate with each other. And they stalemated because of the weapons that they developed. They developed things like the Gatling gun. They developed poison gas. They developed airplanes, and they developed tanks. All of these different weapons, all they ended up doing was basically just stalemating each other inside of these huge trenches. And it was a disastrous war. I'll give you just one example. At the Battle of the Somme, the British alone lost 50,000 people on one day. By the time the war was over, all sides lost 10 million people. Now, when the war did end in 1919, President Woodrow Wilson seemed like the hero. He, in fact, was the rock star of the world. And Woodrow Wilson decided to push for what he called the 14 points. Now, there are a lot of stuff in the 14 points, but we're just going to focus on the big ones. The 14 points included open trade over the seas, public diplomacy, a de-escalation of arms development, and national sovereignty to countries. What was he trying to do? He was trying to get rid of the conflict between countries that had led up to World War I. Problem was, one of his key parts to this was something called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was meant to be a place where all countries could come together and join together in what is known as collective security. Collective security was the idea that they would stop any countries from starting war ever again. Well, back in the United States, there was a Republican named Henry Cabot Lodge, and he led a group of people called the Isolationists, and they in the Senate opposed this idea. They didn't want to give up American sovereignty to an international organization. And in the end, they passed something called Article 10. Article 10 said, we join the League of Nations, but we wouldn't give them ultimate authority. Woodrow Wilson said, no way am I going to sign on to this, so he called for people to veto his own bill. He never did get involved in the League of Nations. In the end, though, because of everything we had done, we had become global leaders in the world. Next up, though, is domestic policy, and this one's really important for what happened in World War I and what we're going to see long term. During World War I, the president became what today we call the imperial president. Why do we say that? Well, because the president started to centralize more and more power in his hands to run during wartime. Now, this is not the first time this happened. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, had actually suspended something called habeas corpus. That's where you inform somebody of why they're going to be imprisoned before they're imprisoned. Abraham Lincoln didn't go for that. He just allowed for himself to imprison people on the Confederate side. So we'd already seen the president doing this under what he called emergency powers, but this became even more pronounced during the time of Woodrow Wilson. Plus, there are a number of other things that Woodrow Wilson does that really started to bring in the question of the centralization of power. For example, he had numerous government agencies working together with different parts of the private sector in order to win the war. I'll give you just a few examples of this. First off is George Creel. George Creel was put in charge of the Committee on Public Safety. They worked with Hollywood in order to sell the war to the public. Another one was the War Industries Board, led by Bernard Baruch. He worked with private companies to make sure that they could set up quotas and they could set up ways to make sure that the government could use things like scrap iron in order to build up the army. A third one was Treasury Secretary William McAdoo, who had established a way to work with the railroad companies. The government basically took over the railroads for a short period of time in order to make sure that they would have good transportation throughout this entire time period. Now, on top of all of this, there were some very questionable actions taken when it came to civil liberties. For example, during this time period, the government passed the Sedition and Espionage Acts. Sedition and Espionage Acts said that anybody who spoke out against the war could be imprisoned. Yes, they did imprison people over this. For example, Eugene Debs, the leader of the Socialist Party, was imprisoned at this time period because he spoke out against the war. There was also a very famous Supreme Court case called Schenck versus United States. In the case of Schenck versus United States, the Supreme Court argued that the president could, during the time of war, curtail basic civil liberties. It's really going to bring into question long-term what a president can do during any type of war situation. Now, in the end, there were massive changes that took place in people's lives during World War I, especially on the home front. For one thing, African Americans began moving more and more into central urban centers to fight in factories. Women, although doing this more in World War II, also started to move in and fill in the gaps for jobs within urban centers as well. And we saw a new pattern arise in the case of Mexico and the United States, in which Mexican farm labor would cross over the border in order to do harvesting of crops here in the United States because farmers had left in order to fight for the war. This would eventually establish a pattern of migration from Mexico to the United States that in many ways is continuing to today. So what are our big three takeaways when we think about this time period in World War I? Takeaway number one, the United States ends this war becoming a global leader because of the 14 points in the League of Nations. Number two, the United States is going to go through an internal questioning over civil liberties and the question of what the role of the presidency is going to be during a time of war. And number three, we start to see and will continue to see during these war times women and minorities gaining more and more rights and more opportunities as they move into urban centers. See you in class.